outfit, right? It's the outfit. Okay, before we get started, and as we're getting everything together on live stream, ladies and gentlemen, please silence your cell phones. Don't be that person in the African American Meeting House this evening. Okay, well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Museum of African American History. I am Dr. Noelle Trent, the president and CEO of the museum, and we are excited, yes, to have you here for our 6th Museum of African American History Stone Book Award and the first in-person ceremony since 2019, right? It feels good to be back in person, yes. This award was created in partnership with Kathy Stone in 2017 and is funded through a generous grant from the Stone Foundation. Now, the award has grown from a $25,000 prize for one winner to $50,000 for the winner and $10,000 for 2 finalists beginning in 2021. This is the largest, I'm going to say that again, the largest prize for nonfiction writing in African American history and culture in the field. Yes, we are very proud of that. Not only do we love this history, we're going to put some money behind that love, right? So this year's winners were chosen from over 90 submissions, which were narrowed down to 14 that made the short list. You can visit the website, maahstonebookaward.org, or look at the bookmarks in your program. And our winners were chosen by 5 scholars who are the top scholars from around the country, representing a variety of institutions, from HBCUs to state-funded institutions to Ivy League schools. This year's jurors are Dana Williams from Howard University, Jesse McCarthy from Harvard University, Charles McKinney from Rhodes College, Courtney Baker from the University of California, Riverside, and William Sturkey from the University of Pennsylvania. Thank you, jurors, for your hard work. Now, you may wonder why a museum would choose to award a book. The telling of Black stories, Black history is under threat. There's a song from the Civil Rights Movement that asks, which side are you on, boy? Which side are you on? Well, we are on the side of history. We are on the side of truth, and we celebrate those scholars who bring the stories to light, who help us better understand the world around us. This award is an acknowledgement of excellent work and an investment in the work to come. Winners, you guys aren't supposed to stop. We want more because we need more, am I right? We also want to thank the honorary committee chaired by Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot. Now, I'm sure if you haven't heard, you're wondering, so who has won this year's award? Well, will our finalists please stand? Claude Johnson for the Black Fives, the epic story of basketball's forgotten era. And Carrie Greenidge, The Grimkeys, the legacy of slavery in an American family. And you know, I always wanted to do the Oscars, so this is my closest moment. And I need an envelope next year, Pam. Pam, I need an envelope next year. I know it's not a secret, but I want an envelope next year. The 2023 Museum of African American History Stone Book Award winner is Thulani Davis for Born in the Emancipation Circuit, Black Activism Forging a Culture of Freedom. Congratulations to all of you. Please welcome Kathy Stone, president of the Stone Foundation.
Thank you, Dr. Trent. We are so delighted that you are leading the museum, and it's a pleasure to partner with you on the prize. Tonight is a night that my husband Jim, and his colleague, Sonia Plessett, who runs the foundation. We look forward to this every year. It's a time to pause from our day-to-day activities to celebrate exceptional writing and reflect on the power found in illuminating and hearing witness to our shared past. To all of you here at the museum, at the Meeting House, joining us online, thank you for being part of the award's ever-expanding community of advocates. For those of us joining for the first time, you're in for a great treat. I can't wait for you to hear from our jurors, our winners, and our wonderful host, Kelly Crosley, who has joined us again for another year. We have a terrific program ahead, and all I'm up here for is to say thank you. First, to our jurors. They do an extraordinary job each year. There are roughly 90 submissions, serious submissions every year. And they put enormous attention and care to the reading and have the hardest job in choosing the winners. I also want to give special thanks to Dana Williams, who has been a member of our jury since the very beginning. She's the one juror that deserves a special, and finally, to Pam Waterman and Michelle Rush. Pam is not only the founding director of the prize, she is the current director of the prize. She's the only director of the prize. And so anything that has been done that's good, you can thank Pam. Yes. And assisting her on the graphics and communication is Michelle Samplin Salgado, who's here, and she's worked with Pam. She's worked with Pam from the very beginning, and they make a wonderful team, and we're all, the better for it. So thank you all for being here. As I said, I'm just here to thank everybody and to say how proud Jim and I are to be associated with the museum and the prize. Thank you.
Good evening. Good evening. I'm from Memphis. You know how we roll. Frederick Douglass was once here, but let me get to it. So I'm Charles McKinney, Associate Professor of History and Director of Africana Studies at Rhodes College in Memphis, Tennessee. And I'm very honored to be one of the jurors for the Stone Book Award. The title of Claude Johnson's award-winning book is The Black Fives, the epic story of basketball's forgotten era. And folks, this title is truly truth in advertising. The scope of the book does, in fact, reach the epic. From New York City to Pittsburgh to Iowa, following along the trails of the first generation of barnstorming amateur and later professional black basketball teams, Jordan takes us on an odyssey, rendering these first and largely forgotten decades of black basketball with clarity, concision, and compassion. One of the things that historians do when they are at their best, and Brother Johnson with this book is at his best, is to take a moment or a movement or an individual and place them or it deeply within their own context. Think of Taylor Branch, America in the King years. It's not the King years, it's America in the King years. Right? King is brought to life, rendered in 3 dimensions by placing him in the times in which he lived. You can't understand King without understanding the context. It doesn't make any sense. Johnson does something very similar here with one of my new heroes, one of the stars of the book, a brother by the name of Will Madden, who you will get to know once you read this amazing book. Who is Will Madden, you might ask? Well, he's one of the architects of modern basketball. He's one of the architects of black basketball. He's known as the Black President, and we've never heard of Will Madden. His name should be known by every baller and fan of the sport in the country. But he's dropped off of the radar, buried in a pauper's grave in New Jersey. His story almost lost to history until Brother Johnson produced this powerful, lyrical, deeply researched, epic excavation. This book, ladies and gentlemen, is monumental. It makes me think of the work of Alice Walker and the work that she did to revitalize Zora Neale Hurston in the early 1970s. That's what he's doing here with Will Madden, right? That's exactly the same thing. Johnson shows us what sorts of magic can happen when you follow a thread of a story and take it to its full conclusion. Will Madden, the character in the main character, one of the main characters in this book, is the key to opening up the universe of black basketball and the dynamic interplay between that community and the world that shaped it. This book is meticulously researched. I'm hoping that Brother Johnson, when he comes up here, will come clean with us and let us know that he is in fact, I hope he's honest with us and let us know that he is in fact 140 years old and that it actually took him 70 years to research this book. That would make me feel better as an historian, but that's probably not the case. The brother's just good. So I don't have a whole lot of time. We've got 3 minutes, which is, an academic who's from a preaching background. That's really, really violent. But I will leave you with this. The Black Fives represents history at its very best. It is a compelling story that will draw you in, educate you, and remind you of the beautiful, brilliant, powerful things that people can do when they set their minds to doing them, in many instances against what some would consider insurmountable odds. And they did those things, those beautiful and powerful and transformative things, they did them anyway. Thank you.
Thank you so much. First, I have to ask your indulgence here. I mean, Frederick Douglass didn't have an iPhone. My name is Claude Johnson, the author of the book that was just described, and I just wanted to make a couple of remarks. First of all, thank you to the Stone family, the Stone Book Award jury, the Museum of African American History itself, and everyone here and watching the live stream, including my friends and family who are also watching and are also here. This is a full circle moment for me because my grandfather never learned how to read or write. He left northern Louisiana to go to south side of Chicago, was a Pullman porter for his entire career, but he had a lot of dignity. When my dad left for college, he said to my dad, "Watch out for them educations. They'll bust your head wide open." My dad ended up becoming a Russian interpreter for the US Army during the Cold War. Then he got a PhD at the University of Vienna on the GI Bill, became a college professor in Africa, and then when we moved to America, he became a professor at Boston College and a lecturer at the Harvard Business School before being named as the Secretary of Education for the great Commonwealth of Massachusetts. When we moved here, I didn't have command of the English language. I knew the language. But so because of that, I opted, and that's because my mom was German, and so we had all these languages flying around. I didn't have command, so I opted to listen instead of talk, to observe instead of engage. Often, I felt voiceless. For that reason and other reasons, I became an angry, maladjusted youth. In one of my many trips to the principal's office during 4th grade in elementary school in Auburndale, Massachusetts, not far away, I was told I wasn't allowed to read the books meant for older kids. Eventually, I got straight D's in English during middle school. In high school, though, over in Concord, Massachusetts, where I went to CCHS over there, it was my 9th grade English teacher, Mr. Callahan, who pulled me aside one day after class and asked me essentially, why I did those disrespectful, disruptive things that I used to do. And he asked me about my family. I realized it was the first time anybody had ever asked me during my entire high school career anything about me. It turned me around, and from then on, I started getting A's and B's, eventually went to college, got a degree in engineering at Carnegie Mellon University, and a master's degree at Stanford University. And now I'm here to accept a prestigious literary prize for my first book on my first try. In it, I attempt to give voice to the voiceless, as Dr. McKinney explained. Long, once-forgotten pioneers. My grandfather was right. Them educations will bust your head wide open. Meanwhile, I'm glad to be just another author from Concord. You couldn't really make this up, right? Finally, though, I want to thank Mr. Callahan, an obscure English teacher whose name was never mentioned in the same sentence as difference makers such as Thoreau, Emerson, and Alcott until now. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jesse McCarthy, and I am professor of English and professor of African and African American Studies at Harvard University. It is my great honor and pleasure to be introducing Carrie Greenidge this evening and her book. Professor Greenidge is at Tufts University and is already the author of 3 books. I'd like to mention them. Boston's Abolitionists, this feels like an appropriate place. Black Radical, The Life and Times of William Monroe Trotter, published in 2020, and I think a pioneering book and clearly the finest study, in my view, of William Monroe Trotter, now and probably definitively. And now the book we are celebrating this evening, The Grimke's. In The Grimke's, The Legacy of Slavery in an American Family, Professor Carrie Greenidge tells the story of our nation as the story of 2 families, one white and one black, bound together by the legacy of slavery and their descendants' struggles against what Saidiya Hartman has called the afterlife of slavery and its enduring consequences. The Grimke sisters, famous even in their own time as symbols of the ideals of white abolitionist politics, have had their story told before. But never has that story been told from the point of view of their black relatives, and with the history of the black family and their perspectives being centered. In this sweeping, beautifully crafted, and superbly written book, the lived experience of those centuries of unfreedom on either side of emancipation are tied together, and the terrible ironies of American history that this family almost uncannily represents bring the past to life. The past, but also the present. For one of the most remarkable things about this book is its pitch-perfect ear for the echoes of our contemporary vexations when it comes to the difficult conversations that take place not between enemies of progress, but among the ranks of those who are in spirit committed to the cause of a more perfect union. On a personal note, I'm also very grateful to Professor Greenidge for foregrounding a great Black poet, Angelina Weld Grimke, who I and other literary scholars have been trying to bring greater attention to in recent years. But as a jury, we were collectively awed by the depth and the rigor, the clarity and the honest truth-telling with which Greenidge approaches her subject. With this book, I feel she has already joined the foremost ranks of our contemporary historians. This is a magnificent book, and we are so proud to see it recognized this evening. Thank you, Carrie, for this.
I know we're in like a post-Me Too era and I shouldn't be hugging, but thank you for those very, very kind and beautiful words. They're wonderful. Much like Claude before me and everyone who's here with me now, this is sort of very personal for me. My relationship with this building and with MAAH goes back many, many years. My grandparents, Ariel Dance and Samuel Lee Dance, lived in the South End and owned buildings in the South End, and then moved to Arlington in the 1950s, where they were one of the first Black families to live in that suburb, and where my mother, who is not here tonight, Ariel Greenidge, was raised. My Uncle David, where are you, Uncle David? There he is, was raised, and my Aunt Suzanne was raised. And when I came along and was growing up in post-busing New England, my grandparents managed to raise myself and my two sisters, the phenomenal Obie-winning playwright Kirsten Greenidge, my younger, phenomenally brilliant little sister, Caitlin Greenidge. They managed to raise us to really see Black people everywhere. And it really wasn't until I was an adult that I realized how much of a conscious decision that was for them to do, growing up in Massachusetts in the 70s and 80s, where, much to my surprise later on, there weren't a lot of us around. And it took me until I went to college to be like, oh wait, there's like 2% of the population was Black, and I knew all of them. So I would like to say that first and foremost, thank you to my grandparents, and thank you to my family. And thank you particularly for bringing me to this building when I was a cellist when I was a child. I was in Project STEP, and I took cello at New England Conservatory. And I came here when I was 6 years old and played Bach with a Black harpist right here, and this was before the building was redone. And I remember asking my grandmother when we were driving, and I had my little Mary Jane shoes on, I asked her, well, why is there a church here if all Black people live in Roxbury? And she said, oh, girls, so like, oh, Carrie, the Black people live everywhere. And just because you see Black people here in a certain space when you're here doesn't mean we've always been here. And so it's from that kernel that I often approach my history, my scholarship, the way that I look for and find Black people in places where often we say that we do not exist. So I would like to thank the Museum of African American History for being a place where that was the first place, literally, where I was told that coming down Joy Street in my Mary Jane shoes with my cello, asking questions. I would like to thank the museum because during high school, I interned for the museum. I worked for about 8 years as a historian and as a tour guide with the Black Heritage Trail. And so this place has a strong connection to my approach as a historian and my approach to public history and my belief that history, particularly stories of Black people, should be accessible to as many people as possible so that people can engage with very complex stuff in the simplest way possible. So thank you, Museum of African American History. Thank you, Stone family. Thank you and welcome to Noelle Trent, who is going to be our fabulous new fearless leader going forward. And finally, I'd like to say thank you to my fellow academics, particularly those who participate in the juries. I know that what we do is often misunderstood, particularly in this political moment that we're in. Often we are tasked, particularly as Black academics, with doing much more than the job description originally told us to do. And so I say thank you, and I say thank you and name them by name. Kelly Carter Jackson, who works with me here at the Museum of African American History, but my partner in crime, Kendra Field, who's in the back row filming it, who's a professor at Tufts University as well. And I want to say that what we do matters. What we do is hard, even in political moments when we're told that what we do is frivolous. We are telling the stories of people and complicating the narratives that we've been told about myself. So thank you, thank you, thank you, Museum. Thank you for those accolades, and thank you for this honor.
Good evening. My name is Dana Williams, and I am Professor of African American Literature and Dean of the Graduate School at Howard University. I also have to say that I did my undergraduate work at Grambling State University, so us North Louisiana folks did all right, yeah. I'm a proud member of the team of jurors reading for the Stone Book Award as well. Because the author I have the pleasure of introducing will talk to you about her book, I must resist the temptation to tell you about it and focus more on the important work the book does. Like so many of the books nominated this year and in previous years, Talani Davis's Emancipation Circuit reflects the author's commitment to deep and sustained research. Emancipation Circuit also shares with other long list books a commitment to centering the Black stories that matter, our stories. Where it does unique, important work is in its storytelling, its ability to function and to offer connective tissue that then functions to support our better understanding of history and the history that it tells, to transport out the waste of mistellings from our historical imagination, and conversely, to transport in the truth of our stories, both discreetly and in conversation one with another. This connective tissue defends our history against those who would deny the ways our history of self-sufficiency matters in this country and beyond. This, of course, is a function of the ways that we have retained our African sensibilities in the so-called New World. Emancipation Circuit repairs the breaches enacted by bad historiography that underwrites white supremacy and undermines Black history. And it gives us all that we need to think and the important work we need to live up to the future with an awareness of and a commitment to and an understanding of the abundance available to all when we collectively forego the greed that threatens our common humanity. These are the people she writes about, people who understood this work. Let me share a few final points the jurors made about Talani Davis's Emancipation Circuit before Dr. Davis speaks for herself. Sometimes you can imagine a book being written by another author. Like really, you can say, somebody else could have written this book. Most of the time we don't mean it pejoratively. We're not saying that it could have been better, but you could slot an author in and out, particularly if you think about an example of a public figure who had many people around them at different points that could have written a book. While it might vary a bit depending on the author, honestly, you might be able to move that author out if the book's editor is first rate. But this book, we all agreed, only Talani Davis could have written this book. Her experiences as a journalist and a researcher, as a culture worker, her command of language across multiple genres, her understanding of the world that was and is and our relation to it, and her ability to render a complexity of thought with accessibility is uniquely hers. With graceful language and prose and meticulous research, Dr. Davis has disentangled and then weaved together an incredible narrative while offering us a highly accessible story. She writes about us, she writes for us, she is us. Congratulations, Dr. Davis, on a remarkable achievement, and thank you on behalf of the communities you are clearly a part of and write about, and on behalf of the jurors, we also say thank you. You helped make our work joy.
Thank you so much. I want to thank everybody associated with the MAAH Stone Book Award. There's quite a community that makes this happen. I'm a school teacher, so hello could take 3 minutes. I'm going to do my best to get it under that, or close. Freed people did not merely create a black public in the South. Oh, I forgot my first aside. I was wanting to say, I went to the colored school in my hometown in Hampton, Virginia, and we got the thrown out books from the white school across town, and my black teachers mimeographed all the poetry that they loved from the Harlem Renaissance, told us to memorize it, and said, nobody can ever take it from you, and spent nights mimeographing history for us. I am from Virginia, where everybody's crazy about history, but my teachers were really crazy. And when I published my first book, which is about the sit-ins in my hometown, my 5th grade teacher came to the bookstore and said, I saved the essay you wrote about the sit-ins in 5th grade. So I feel like I was empowered and encouraged early on. Freed people did not merely create a black public in the South, which did occur. They created a mobilized public. They did not merely create a public voice for black people, which was necessary. They attempted immediate actions. They shared the experience of oppression of the slave system and creating a unified but heterogeneous black culture within the slave system had already made possible an open space for the expression of an admixture of practices and traditions. It made for a participatory process that assumed mutual respect, publicly recognized suffering, and trusted in testimony about events not witnessed by everyone in the deliberative body. These are the foundations of the movement process as developed, sustained, and disseminated over the long arc of black movement building. The laws and provisions that freed people and their allies wrote into their state constitutions, passed in the legislatures, or tried to pass reflect the lessons learned from the slave system regarding the innumerable harms to human beings wrought by treating them as disposable property. Without necessarily being aware of the conditions in which other people toiled in the North, freed people and their allies assisted this society in coming to understand people should not be physically assaulted in the workplace, beaten in their homes, or deprived of humane work hours or leave for illness. They should be allowed to bury any workers who die on the job. They attempted to make changes so that women would have the right to be heads of household and have custody of their children, dissolve a problematic partnership, speak in public, participate in governance, own property, earn equal wages, and along with others have equal protection under the law. They could see that such decisions were sought or acted on every day. Freed people saw that state and federal governments needed to expand their missions not only to help build infrastructure, but also to aid in matters of public health, the enormous problem of sick and orphan children following the war, and educating all the citizens for the sake of a more enlightened society. Their immersion in the rights of citizenship, accompanied by a sense of urgency that rarely sweeps across broad swaths of society, except in times of war, epidemics, famine, or other disasters. I seem to have lost a verb somewhere in there. These proposals arose from envisioning survival and better lives for children, new possible futures in a landscape of violent resistance. So here we are. People like Lincoln, Douglas, and Tubman, who I track, making note of meteors, falling stars, and other events that were actually going on from just before the war till after. They gave more than their full measure and were watching the stars as they did it and found hope in what they were witnessing in the skies. Today, as the planet heats up, not from falling stars, but literally, and metaphorically as well, from our own hostilities, we have to borrow their hope and do the impossible. Thank you.
How are you doing? I'm Callie Crossley. I'm a host and commentator at GBH Boston, in case you forget. The call letters do not stand for God bless Harvard, but now you'll not forget it. It's my great honor to be here again for this, one of my favorite events is the Stone Awards, so I come excited to talk to you about your book. And I just want to point out that we've been set up, or your book has been set up for this discussion already. Insurmountable odds were mentioned, and the legacy of the afterlife of slavery. And that is where the Emancipation Circuit rests. Mm-hmm. I'm going to read just one line of how you describe the Emancipation Circuit, and then I want you to detail what we really mean when we say that, or what you say that. The circuit was shaped by people seeing freedom through the prism of slavery, flight from slavery, and the conditions of displacement and statelessness that were the first realities of abolition. So please explain how the geography of this worked, and in fact, what was also happening was a geography of ideas at the same time, and how, very importantly, that we are not talking about the circuit and the network many people think about when you think about Underground Railroad. That's not what we mean.
Oh.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
When I was young, we got a phone call in 1959 saying there were sit-ins in North Carolina. It was my cousin Bill, or I guess he was a cousin of mine who taught school in North Carolina. The next week, we marched in my hometown, and the students went and did the sit-ins. There's always been a circuit. It's just that in the 19th century, it's hard to see where it was because they couldn't call on the phone. But I discovered from tearing a tendon in my foot at a time I was supposed to be on a plane to do research in Mississippi, that I wanted to see where people were doing the stuff I was writing about. So I started making maps. And it was just obvious from the beginning, because I knew the first counties where organizing started, that they went to the next county, and then the next one. And people in the second county went to the third county as well. And they went back to check after explaining what our possible rights were going to be. This is before we got the vote. They went back, and then there were circuit riders who went back and followed up, like, okay, are you continuing to teach this in your community? And they elected officials along those pathways. The pathways weren't really obvious unless you were looking at a map, because they were using rivers, they were going by sailboat, and they were going by horse. So if somebody was elected in the 19th century anywhere in the South, that elected official, particularly if he represented 2 counties or 2 areas, he would have to ride 250 miles in a week or 2 across to give rallies. They weren't necessarily meetings indoors, particularly in the summer, to 2,000 or 3,000 people. And when they would get there, there would be people with rifles at the outside of the rally to make sure that nobody got hurt because they were having a meeting. So that latter part I was reading in the accounts from people who did the work, but putting it on a map allowed me to see how incredibly effective it was. So I started mapping all 9 states. I was going to do 11, but life is short. So, mapping 9 took a lot of work and rework. So the geography came to me that way, but it was really from an instinct that people try to elaborate the grapevine, a 19th century expression. They were not just passing information on the fence. And that fence went a long way if that's what they were doing, but guys who were loading trains with cotton would ride on the train and they could pass news at the next stop from plantation to plantation to plantation. And that's where what is not in the history, most of the books I read, the big books that were written in the 60s, when I went back to school in my 50s to be a historian instead of a literary scholar, I was rereading books I read when I was in my 20s, and the teacher would ask about it, and I'd say, ask about the slavery, the information on slavery in there, and I was like, oh, you mean the black chapter? They had a 500-page book with 1 chapter on the people who were enslaved at the plantation owned by the white people the book was really about. So it just seemed to me that people, in a sense, weren't visualizing what people had done, and also it's in the subtext of the interviews where you have to read like where people went, migrating around the South, things like that, where their other family members were, to just even suss out what kind of connections they were trying to keep.
So let me fill in some more context. So first of all, thank you, Stone Awards. The very first discussion I had here was with Julius Scott, Common Wind, and you referred to his research quite a bit about how this information was passed among communities that people thought had no information and could not pass it. So that's very much a part of what is happening here. And then along as the circuits are being built, these are self-liberated Africans, really, at this point, who just, if they can leave, they leave, insurmountable odds, and then go toward when they see a military encampment and settle there. What you brought out in your book that I have never understood, I don't know where I've been, I did not think about how many people would be gathering in a space? Like, what are those communities? Just share with people how big these encampments ended up being. So when you talk about moving around a circuit, I mean, it's huge numbers of people.
One of my delights in writing it is trying to imagine how shocked everybody was, from the Union soldiers to the activists who had come from New England to enslaved people themselves. In my hometown, 2,000 people came after 3 people were given shelter there. A year later, there were 10,000 people. They were building tent structures out of lumber that was thrown out by the army. The town, at its best, had 2,000 people in it before the war, more like 1,500. So there's 10 people sitting around this fort and on the beaches on the Chesapeake Bay for a couple of years. And they built the community that my grandfather was born in. My great-grandfather was one of those who fled there. he managed, because everybody associated with the Confederacy fled the town, he managed to get, he was enslaved at a different place from his family, but he got his wife and a total of 10 people out of the plantation they were on in that area. But people came after the Union Army was set up and those people were there. They started coming from Western Virginia, from very far, because somehow on the circuit the word spread exactly where the Union Army was, and they came. 10,000 people around Wilmington, North Carolina, and New Bern. Towns like Charleston were not that big then, so there's nobody who was not startled by the number of enslaved people who came and by being able to envision the size of this industry of forced labor. So I think there's 10 movies in this book that
no kidding.
focus on people going into a port city and seeing how the size of the slave system. That every time I see it, I just wish I could actually see a photograph of people staring at all the people coming in, because it informed, one of the conceits in my book is that it informed black people who had been called head, like, so the master so-and-so has 500 head of people, and they were called niggers. And at this point, they are realizing that the other people who are viewing them are calling them because they're a single community. Even people who've never seen this before are saying, okay, they are a big crowd. And they start to have discussions about we, calling themselves we. The size of we expands from 200 people on a plantation to imagining tens of thousands of people who have been sharing the same kind of experience. So for me, it seemed like this moment of revelation that produced this political theory called mobilized communities, that they just realized the mobilization had to not just be local, but to move as far as they could get it to spread. So that, to me, is where the beloved community comes from. Not just that we're all in it together, but it's a big we. And people like Bayard Rustin in the 60s were going down south and having rallies so that the Montgomery bus boycott wouldn't just be in Montgomery. They were bringing ministers to different towns that hadn't started a bus boycott yet. So to me, that's part of the gift of freed people to our culture. And I just want to mention one other thing I'm really obsessed with now, and that is that those meetings and the founding of all the black churches in the South created a space where black testimony mattered, where it was taken to be true and where it mattered. And we are still struggling in a world where black testimony is not even allowed to be given. These people could not give testimony in court by law until they got the law changed. But today, if you're stopped while driving while black, your testimony about what the moment is about may never be heard. It might not be listened to in the first instance. It might not end up in the court papers later. It was so undermining that no one was ever supposed to hear from a slave, that freed people really recognized they needed testimony in order to heal, and they needed testimony to move forward. They needed each other's testimony, and they needed a safe place to deal with trauma.
So a couple of things. Now imagine in these large groups of people, they don't have any food, they don't have any work, remember? So it's a very tough situation both for those communities and the military, not expecting to have all these people, and what are we to do with them? This is a part of the war experience, but there you have it.
They were doing fishes and loaves.
Right.
I don't know how they did it, but
That's what happened.
That's what they did.
In Tulani's book, there are very detailed maps of the 9 states, which include Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Arkansas. And in each of those, there's a chapter with an example of some of the issues that these self-liberated people, going from them to we, were working with. Talking about the right to assemble. What happens with the custody of kids? How does majority rule work? I mean, you think about that from our perspective. These are conversations we have all the time. Imagine you've never had these conversations before. And by the way, the military is not helping you. You're doing this within the kind of testimony that you described.
Well, that's where the lens of slavery is real helpful. They could say, oh, okay, we've been declared free. They walk off the plantation they were on. They didn't have custody of their kids. It's like, because we weren't in the law, when they started rewriting the law, they made exceptions for us to not have custody of our kids. Everything a displaced population needs, they started demanding of society long before the rest of society was prepared to deal with it. So freed women took the first cases of domestic violence to court. Nobody paid attention for decades to those first cases, but they are the basis for the first statewide laws that were passed like 20 years later about domestic violence. Same thing about the treatment of prisoners. They had been prisoners, but enslaved people didn't go to jail. But once they started taking freed people and putting them in jail, they noticed through the lens of slavery, like they beat people in jail. We've already been through that. If you're just there for a legal process, why should you be beaten? Why should prisoners be whipped? They tried to pass laws against that. The last whipping happened in a prison in Arkansas in the 1960s. That's how long it took and how clear the lens of slavery was about the welfare of the entire population, the entire culture. Women who had 3 or 4 children by various people during slavery by choice or not, who didn't know where the fathers were, needed to be heads of their households. So they went to court. And it's amazing to me, really, because that it didn't happen for women across America for some years, but they went after it, and they sort of, laws they passed are used to get women equal wages every day today. Same laws they passed, so, or got passed. So I was just like amazed when I started to look at what happened to the things they tried to pass that failed, how long it took the rest of the culture to
catch up.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, we're going to pause there. I'll say, because we're going to open it up to questions for Tulani from all of you, also to Carrie, and also to Claude. And so this is your moment. I will say congratulations again to you.
Thank you. It's really thrilling.
While you're getting yourselves together, I'm reminded of a comment by the Reverend Otis Moss, Jr., somewhat well-known minister. He says, faith and risk are the same word. And I thought of that often as I read your book. There is a rotating microphone waiting for you. I can keep going. Questions?
I don't have a question, but I have a statement. And
Okay,
I
Claude.
want to just
I feel
say
it.
that I absolutely want to once again applaud Jim and Kathy Stone, because at this inflection time when Black history is being attempted to be erased, it is important that we honor and celebrate our scholars who are ensuring that Black history lives. Thank you.
I routinely ask my students now at the beginning of every semester, how many semesters of history did you have in high school? Because 2 years ago, a young man startled me. He's a STEM student. He had 1 semester of American history in 4 years of high school. So when I started hearing about people like DeSantis trying to get rid of it, I just said to myself, that was done. That was achieved a long time ago. There were so many states where certain people of a certain political mind got on the boards of the textbook, the state textbook agency, and eliminated things such that my students tell me there's 1 day on slavery and 1 day on Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King. So the textbooks in a way have already achieved what people are saying for political reasons they're trying to achieve. So I'm just so glad that books like Carrie's are an alternative to everything I've ever read about the Grimkes, that there's an alternative interest being created also by the way that these writers are approaching their subjects too. So that my students are apt to read the book out of interest rather than because somebody in high school told them they needed to know about that. Because Black culture has pushed forward an interest in these stories about the past of the culture.
Okay, question?
Hi, yes. So I have learned that as you research not only history, but even present events, you end up finding out things that give a little bit more context to yourself and your family and your relations to other people, ones that really change how you see yourself on a deeper level. And this question goes to you and the other finalists as well. Do you recall a moment that you encountered something in your own research that had that effect on you?
I kind of live in that zone all the time. There are particular stories that hit me. One is in the book about these 4 Union soldiers who got put in a camp, a Confederate camp in Charleston, and they escaped from there. All the other people they were hearing trying to escape from there, they heard get shot. But it was during the bombardment, and they were anxious to get out of this prison. They did escape, and they went and found themselves on a plantation, and they saw some enslaved person and said, "Where's the main road? We're trying to get," they were trying to get to Knoxville, Tennessee from Charleston. It's 400 miles at least. And this enslaved person said, "Don't go on the main road. The Confederate army's coming that way." And they hid these 4 guys, they were all officers, and fed them. And then the next day, another person appeared wherever they had hidden them and said, "This guy, I'm your next guide. We're going to get you to Knoxville." And they took, that person took them something that I think would have taken 8 or 10 hours to walk back from. So they took them quite a few miles to another plantation where they knew somebody else. This is the circuit working. This is why I love the story. And 40 different enslaved people were guides for these people and got them to the Appalachians, where they were introduced to some white outliers who had avoided being in the Confederacy, who took them up through the mountains to where they could descend to Knoxville, and they made it safely. The white guides came back to their hometown where they were hiding out, and they had been hiding in the hills also, and were all killed. This soldier who wrote a diary of it wrote down the names of all these black people such as they gave them, usually just a first name. But after the war, he got sent down there to this exact community where they had started the first plantation. And he was supposed to distribute goods to people who were poor for the military, and things like flour, cornmeal, stuff like that. And they would load wagons up, and one day this white woman who introduced him to the 10 white guys who got killed appeared. She didn't recognize him. He was pretty well war-worn, I guess, when she had seen him. And she went in her pocket and she said, this Union soldier gave me this note so I could get help when you all came. And it was a note he had written. And he loaded her wagon up quite a bit. But I just thought to myself, it proves my circuit exists, even in a very manual way that you could walk the circuit. But I just felt like it was a deep human experience also, and taught him lessons no school book could teach. So that's one of my favorite stories. Thank you for asking.
Claude? You want to answer? He wants to hear from both of you. Oh, the question is, in doing all this research, is there something that had a particular resonance for you as you're, because you're unearthing many, many facts, but is there one thing that perhaps struck you in doing your work?
Yes, so thank you for that question. Many researchers know that there is a void in the Amsterdam News. It disappeared from its founding in 1910 to 1920. No one knows where those copies are. So they're not in microfilm or anywhere. And I always wondered, well, what did they have to say about this man, Will Anthony Madden, who Dr. McKinney described, and he's on the cover of my book. And as I was pursuing a lead in the research on Will Madden, there was a court case where St. Philip's Protestant Episcopal Church in New York City, which was in Midtown at the time, sued him for something. And somewhere I read that it went to the Supreme Court of New York State. So I looked at the records of that case, the depositions and everything. And lo and behold, among the depositions were a whole series of newspaper clippings from the Amsterdam News from 1914.
That's so great.
Because it helped support this case. And in those clippings, it said that Will Madden was thinking about and really serious about creating an all-black basketball league in 1914.
Wow.
And so that was really, that brought goosebumps to, a history nerd, but also nobody ever knew that. And who would have thought that by being a, like OD on research, that you follow this lead and like who's going to look at this, these legal papers and in the appellate court, but there it was. And so I think just keep at it. That was a great moment for me. But I think there's more like that. There's a mountain of information that we have no idea. Just keep looking for it.
Carrie?
Mm-hmm. I think the biggest thing for me researching the Grimkes was how much the Grimke families talked about the violence that took place in their household under slavery. And I remember going through a lot of the research, and Moreland Spingarn at Howard is like, all of it is in there. and hearing them talk about the violence and the fact that previous historians had seemingly read the same sources, but had not talked about how people are talking about the violence in the household. And to me, that was very chilling, but it was also a kernel that would help me look at, well, why, first we have documentation, but also how it is that people were narrating their lives in that home. When the white Grimke's talked about their house being kind slaveholders, and yet you read their letters back and forth that are talking about the brutality that they visit upon the black people at the same time, it was monumental in terms of requiring me, as all good historians do, to question the sources you're looking at, and what are people saying and what are they not saying. So I think that was the biggest thing for me, and it wasn't just one or two sources. It was in letters back and forth. It was in years after slavery ended, them talking about the type of violent brutality that occurred in the household. So I think that to me it was eye-opening that slavery functioned on that type of brutality that we, as historians, we know, but that it can be seen even in sources that previous historians claim it doesn't exist.
Absolutely. I would pick up that thread and just say, Talani, in Talani's book, the constant threat of violence and the violence that you have detailed quite a bit in those large communities and along the circuit is overwhelming.
I know. I'm sorry, everybody. I read violence every day for 8 years, so yeah, it's because of what you're talking about, because it's actually in the same sources that people use all the time, even the ex-slave interviews. It's sort of maddening that people just overlooked it, so you say, I'm printing it this time. Yeah.
All right, we've got 30 seconds. I know how to count. What might you like to ask? All right, in the back.
What kind of lessons can you maybe bring forward to us from the research that you've done on maybe communication or community, or anything else you'd like to share from your research?
In your 30 seconds.
Spreading ideas is good. Mobilizing people is better. Yeah, engage people around a particular form of action.
Great note to end on. I'm going to invite back Dr. Trent. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Callie. Let's give it up again for Thalani Davis, our 2023 MAAH Stone Book Award winner. Claude Johnson, our finalist, and Carrie Greenidge, our other finalist. This has been an enjoyable evening. Now, please join us tomorrow afternoon at 3 p.m. at the Boston Public Library in Copley Square for a conversation with Dr. Davis and Boston Public Library President David Leonard. And tonight would not have been possible without a supportive team. So we want to say thank you to Pam, Michelle, my wonderful team at the museum, and our volunteers. We want to thank our jurors, our honorary committee members, the Stone Foundation, and we also want to thank our partner, the Boston Foundation, for all of their support. So if you'll indulge me before I go into a little bit of our housekeeping for what's happening next, this is a place where Black testimony matters. I do not say that glibly. I'm not borrowing her words. I'm going to give them back to you. Look around you. Look to the side. Look at the floors. Look up at the ceiling. In this place, Black testimony was shared. People testified here. They mobilized here. They created an action that created a change that affected this city, this commonwealth, this country, and this world. So this place, this museum matters. And for those of you here, as well as those of you live streaming, if you want to continue to see this museum matter, we urge you to support us. You can visit our website to make a donation. Our Director of Development is here. You can see any of my team. And I say that honestly, because we will continue to be here and do this work, because Black testimonies, Black history matters. So for our housekeeping, if you received a golden ticket like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, you get to take one, hear it, one book. I'm gonna say it again, you get to take one book. We are a bunch of history nerds in here. You want all of them, you get one by the others. They are for sale. And you can meet and greet with the authors and the jurors downstairs. Thank you so much. We will see you again next year.